There is hardly a shortage of distressing issues to speak about as we welcome the year 5781. COVID-19, social unrest, a pernicious and persistent hatred of others, preventing us from fulfilling our highest potential as a nation. If you review previous services on our website, you will see that I have spoken extensively on these topics since we began live streaming services in March. But there is another pressing and distressing issue I have not spoken about: identity theft. Do not log into your bank accounts even though you are at your computer this evening. Log instead into your souls. For tonight, I am speaking about the identity theft that has robbed us of our beautiful heritage. I am speaking about the identity theft that has made us, the people of the book, incapable of quoting its content. The identity theft that has made us forget our vocation as a kingdom of priests. The identity theft that has blinded us to our calling as heirs of the great prophets. For too many American Jews, Judaism has been reduced to an ethnicity, a culture, a pastrami sandwich, a mitzvah project. What makes this identity theft different from that of most identity theft victims is that our dilemma is self-inflicted. The obvious factor threatening us is our acculturation. We have embraced American life with its many opportunities and essentially have used our quest to succeed in America as an excuse to let our Judaism falter. In our attempt to be inclusive, universal, and cosmopolitan, and in our desire for acceptance. Whenever the demands of Judaism have come into conflict with the demands of American life has prevailed. Dance is more important than Hebrew school. Soccer trumps Sunday school. Friday night football games are more important than Shabbat services. The synagogue has taken a back seat to virtually every Jewish social and communal organization, and social action has become the raison d'etre of liberal Judaism, which, quite frankly, has led our youth to believe that Judaism is only about saving the world. Tikkun olam, the reparation of the world, must not be devalued. Our world is in desperate need of healing. But how does our social action differ from the social action activities of other religious organizations? They too feed the hungry. They too have social service agencies. They also help build homes for Habitat. Yes, it is important to be a light to the nations, as our tradition mandates, but social action alone will not perpetuate Judaism or the Jewish people. Such universalism undoubtedly is attractive to some of our young people, but at the same time, too many social movements, particularly when aligned with the far left, are unabashedly anti-Semitic as they fixate on Israel's flaws while ignoring the flaws in so many other countries. Josh Block, who is a senior fellow at the Progressive Policy Institute and the CEO of the Israel Project, elaborates. It may be hard to hear, but postmodernism is a threat to Western civilization, to the legitimacy of Jewish history, and to the system of nation-states that gives legitimacy to the modern and only expression of Jewish nationalism, the State of Israel. By teaching our children to value postmodern universal values above their own identity in the specific continuum of Jewish history and peoplehood, we are betraying ourselves, our children, and our communities, and sawing off the limb of collective Jewish commitment on which Jewish universalism has always rested. Should we be surprised some young people turn away from Judaism as they increasingly value postmodern universal values above their own identity? Israel is portrayed as a nationalist state. The Palestinians are viewed as an oppressed people in an occupied land, and the demise of the peace process has nothing to do with their own intransigence, precisely because they are occupied and oppressed. The insistence on making Israel conform to ideals that are unattainable when surrounded by unrelenting enemies, judging Israel's tactical and strategic decisions from safe spaces in America, while people their own age in Israel are fulfilling compulsory military obligations. As Hillel Helkin, the novelist, notes, growing numbers of American Jews care about Israel only to the extent that Israel validates their own self-image and have no use for it or turn against it when it doesn't. As Israel has become less integral to the identity of younger American Jews, so the same is happening with the significance of the Holocaust. A few years ago, when Pew conducted extensive research on American Jewish life, it was discovered that the majority of American Jews felt that remembering the Holocaust was essential to what it means to be Jewish. With the passage of time, that connection is weakening. Professor Daniel Gordis, as we approach elections, adds an additional note of caution, as too many Jews find their religious identity in the political arena. He rightly observes that many left-leaning Jews are feeling ill at ease in a Democratic Party that is increasingly hospitable to unabashed Israel hatred, rooted in something far deeper than critique of Israel's policies or current leadership, while finding the party of Trump increasingly at odds with their vision of a dignified politics that is thoughtful, gracious, and open to the world. Where will we Jews go, Gordis asks, when Judaism becomes politics just as the political space narrows? So here we are. Some social justice causes that, depending on their orientation, may well be antithetical to what ultimately is in our best interests: alienation from the state of Israel by young American Jews who, with escalating anti-Semitism on the far left and the far right, may find in their lifetime that they need Israel more than Israel needs them. A fading recollection of the Holocaust and political parties in which we should no longer feel completely at home. What remains that might guarantee a vibrant Judaism for the next generation? What, before the creation of the State of Israel, or before there ever was a Holocaust, or before postmodernist thought, or before Jews had the freedom to even participate in the political process? What was so special about Judaism, so much so that our ancestors, for the past 1,000 years, chose to stay the course of Jewish life instead of abandoning their ancient faith? As a teen, I loved sitting at the desk of my grandfather. His desk was filled with papers, replete with numbers. And of course, I was extremely proud that my grandfather, an immigrant, had become successful in the world of business. One day, I was sitting next to him. I was 15 years old. I asked him why he had this sculpture of 3 rabbis seemingly engaged in study. His response has never left me. "Business is what I do," he said. "Being a Jew is who I am." 7 years later, in 1977, I began my rabbinic studies at the Hebrew Union College in Jerusalem. Rabbi Shmuley Boteach once wrote that the uniqueness of Judaism is in its emphasis on the small questions of everyday existence at which most people fail. He elaborates: how do I stay married? How do I inspire my children? How do I live a life of a spiritual purpose that is not dominated by corrosive materialism? How do these questions define Jewish identity? Other people also want good marriages. Other people work hard to inspire their children and live a life that is properly balanced between the material and the spiritual. What makes these questions uniquely Jewish, Rabbi and theologian Eugene Borowitz says, is the values we have chosen and the relative weight we have given to them. How do we stay married? This question may be more about the values that govern how we interact with people, and of course, our marriages as well. But Boteach, basing his premise on the understanding that we treat family far better than those we do not know, suggests an inconsistency in our behavior. My grandfather used to say, sensitivity with every person we meet has been a sustaining principle of Judaism since our patriarch Abraham stood up to greet the three strangers at his tent. And Abraham did not ask the religion or race of those strangers. Feeling what others are feeling, looking at ourselves to see how our actions or our inaction, our words or lack of words affect others, he said to me, this is what our tradition means when it instructs us to be a kingdom of priests. I learned from him that when you intentionally slight someone as you walk down the street, as you turn aside to avoid a former friend, you have chosen to forget about Shalom Bayit, the commandment requiring us to create a more peaceful community. I learned from him, Hakem Takim Imo, that we help even our adversaries to pick up their burden. I learned from him that when you use an employee to your advantage, taking credit for what they did, you disobey the commandment regarding stealing. I learned from him that as you deliberately gossip or distort the facts, you are a rachil, a talebearer, and an enemy of truth. I learned from him that if you demean and embarrass a clerk who has confused your order, halbanat panim, the commandment not to publicly humiliate someone, has been violated. I learned from him that if you judge someone unfairly, you have disregarded the Torah's command to judge your comrade righteously. I learned from him that as you push others down to elevate your own status, as you use different standards to treat those you love and those who are strangers, kavod habriot, the imperative to honor all human beings, is rendered meaningless. Honor every single person you meet, every single day, he would say. This is being Jewish. This is the light that brings humanity warmth. And how do we inspire our children? By succumbing to their every ultimatum, or by demonstrating to them that life is filled with demands and expectations and challenges. It has been noted that there is no word in Hebrew for fun. We say l'chaim as we drink a cup of wine, my grandfather taught me, not because the occasion is fun, but because we are cognizant that our time is limited. And therefore, the purpose of Judaism is to acquire a perspective, a wisdom, and bring a degree of sanctity to the few moments of life with which we have been blessed. Did you use your time thoughtfully and constructively, he would ask me? Did you respect the time of others by being on time? Are you surrounding yourself with people from whom you can learn? Papa, I once said to my grandfather, "How did you know to come to America?" I have only an 8th grade cheder education, he said, but in the Torah, I learned perspective. I acquired a wisdom about life. I learned how to make a deal, reading about Abraham's purchase of the cave. And I learned about how to deal with ruthless people as I read about Moses' confrontation with Pharaoh. I learned that we Jews can never be like Isaac, who fails to see that he is the sacrifice. I learned that the journey to the promised land in the Torah was filled with threats, challenges, and disappointments, as it is in our personal lives. And I learned that there are no quick fixes to difficult problems. I finally and fully understood why this sculpture of the Rabbi studying was so important to my grandfather. "You know," he said to me one day, pointing to this sculpture, "the book will survive without the Jewish people. The real question is whether the Jewish people can survive and thrive without the book." My grandfather taught me that some things we learn so that we can make a living, but just as important, maybe even more important, are the things we learn that teach us how to live, especially when we must confront threats, challenges, disappointments, and shattered expectations. That sculpture also taught me that in Judaism, we are compelled to live lives of spiritual purpose, not dominated by corrosive materialism. As an immigrant who came to this country with nothing, my grandfather never forgot what it was like to have nothing. Buying a car for an employee so that he could get to work on time, pulling money out of his wallet to help someone in need, making sure that people were properly compensated when they went above and beyond the requirements of the job, even thanking people for doing the jobs they were paid to do. My grandfather would often say that prosperity can damage the personality. Material items, if you are not careful, can own you. And how, I asked, do you know if they own you? He replied, "You will become callous and calculating and see human relationships as nothing but transactions. You will blame others for their own misfortunes. You will justify your lack of principles, and you will become self-serving and arrogant, diminishing the worth of others because you are worth more. That's when you know your possessions possess you, and that is when, as a Jew, you will have become deaf to the voice of the prophet. Tzniut, he would say, modesty. modesty in attire and in attitude and ego is a hallmark of Jewish life. Never forget, he once said, I came to America not so that you could have a bigger house. I came here so that you could be a bigger person. A devout Jew was nearing his 86th birthday and realized that it was later than he thought. He got his teeth fixed, he dyed his hair jet black, he bought new clothes and a brand new Mercedes. He checked out J-Date and found a like-minded young lady. But as luck would have it, he was fatally struck by a bolt of lightning in a rainstorm. When he confronted God, he pleaded, "Why me? I have always been your humble servant. I have lived a good life, attended religious services regularly, and given tzedakah gladly. You are a God of love and mercy. How could you do this to me?" God looked at him closely and said, "To tell you the truth, I didn't recognize you." Lily Tomlin once said, "I've always wanted to be somebody, but I see now that I should have been more specific." If we are not recognizable as Jews, if respect and holiness have not been at the foundation of how we interact with people, if we have not yet shown our children how Judaism is capable of sanctifying our time through the acquisition of wisdom and a life-affirming and potentially life-preserving perspective, if our quest for the material has left no room for the spiritual, if our personalities and attitudes are ruled by the need for more money and more things, then now is the time to change. At the end of our lives, those near and dear to us should recognize what we lived for and what defined us. If we really want those who come after us not to suffer from identity theft, then it is up to us to set an example in our daily behavior and safeguard what is unique and enduring about Judaism. Shabbat Shalom to all of you. Shana Tova, a good year to all of you, and a year of good health.